The new year got off to a terrible start. What caused a passenger jet and a Black Hawk helicopter to collide in mid-air over Washington, D.C.? And what led an air ambulance to crash just seconds after takeoff? Let's examine the events that led to these tragic accidents. Black Hawk collision. On January 29, 2025, PSA Airlines Flight 5342 was on its final approach to Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. The aircraft had taken off from Wichita earlier that evening, carrying 60 passengers and 4 crew members. 2 experienced pilots were at the controls. The captain had been with PSA Airlines for nearly 6 years, and the first officer for almost 2. The flight had been completely routine up to this point, and weather conditions were favorable. While the pilots were preparing to land, a US Army Black Hawk helicopter, callsign PAT-25, was on a night training mission a few miles away. The helicopter, with 3 crew members on board, was part of an annual evaluation exercise focusing on low-altitude maneuvers over the Potomac River, a mission that demanded precision, coordination, and strict adherence to altitude limits. The helicopter pilots were instructed to stay below 200 feet while following Route 1 before transitioning to Route 4. This well-known helicopter corridor near Reagan National intersects multiple approach and departure paths, requiring perfect coordination with air traffic control. That coordination, however, was under strain. Reagan National had been struggling with controller shortages for years. On this particular night, only one controller was responsible for managing both airplane and helicopter traffic, a role usually split between 2 during busy hours. The controller on duty cleared Flight 5342 to land on runway 1. However, as the aircraft neared, it was reassigned to runway 33, requiring a sidestep maneuver, a rapid shift over the Potomac River that crossed the Black Hawk's route. Meanwhile, the Black Hawk continued along its training path. When asked if they had the CRJ in sight, the crew confirmed visual contact and requested visual separation, meaning they would maintain spacing on their own. The controller approved the request. But as Flight 5342 began its final sequence, the helicopter had drifted slightly off course and climbed to 325 feet, higher than its assigned altitude. Both helicopter pilots were likely using night vision goggles, improving visibility in darkness, but limiting peripheral vision and depth perception. Combined with bright city lights behind the aircraft approach path, the incoming jet was nearly invisible. The conflict alert warning activated in the tower, but by then, the aircraft and helicopter were seconds apart. Flight 5342 continued its descent, while the Black Hawk unknowingly entered its flight path. At 8:48 p.m., the two collided. The Black Hawk disintegrated mid-air, and flaming debris fell into the Potomac River. The jet, severely damaged, lost control and crashed into the river just half a mile short of the runway. Emergency crews from Washington, D.C., Arlington County, Maryland, and the U.S. Coast Guard rushed to the site, battling freezing water and strong currents. Tragically, all 67 people aboard both aircraft lost their lives, the deadliest U.S. aviation disaster in 16 years. What if Reagan National had one more controller that night, allowing separate management of helicopter and fixed-wing traffic? A single extra voice in that tower might have caught the altitude deviation, delayed one clearance, and prevented the most fatal mid-air collision in over a decade. Air ambulance crash. Just 2 days after the Washington tragedy, another struck. On January 31st, a Learjet 55 operating as Medjet's Flight 056 was preparing for a critical air ambulance mission. The plane was set to transport a child and her mother from Northeast Philadelphia Airport to Tijuana, Mexico, with a refueling stop in Springfield, Missouri. That evening, the weather was overcast, with fog and light rain. Winds gusted near 30 mph, but visibility remained around 6 miles, acceptable for operations. 6 people were on board: the young patient, her mother, 2 pilots, a doctor, and a flight paramedic. The jet belonged to Jet Rescue Air Ambulance, a company specializing in transporting critically ill patients across borders for advanced medical care. At 6:06 p.m., the aircraft lined up on runway 24 and was cleared for takeoff. It accelerated smoothly, lifted off, and began its initial climb. But moments later, something went terribly wrong. While flying over residential and commercial areas, the nose pitched down unexpectedly, causing a rapid loss of altitude. The pilots attempted recovery but couldn't regain control. Seconds later, the aircraft plunged into a busy commercial area near Roosevelt Mall, just 3 miles from the airport. The explosion that followed was devastating. All 6 on board perished instantly. On the ground, 1 person was killed and 19 others were injured, some severely burned by the fires that erupted. Radar data revealed the aircraft climbed to 1,650 feet before plummeting at over 11,000 feet per minute, an almost vertical fall. Investigators recovered the cockpit voice recorder and ground proximity system for analysis. This was the second fatal accident involving jet rescue in just 2 years. The company had previously lost a Learjet in the 2023 crash in Mexico. What if the Learjet's maintenance inspection had been delayed just 1 day, giving engineers time to detect a possible control or sensor fault? Or if the crew had aborted takeoff after noticing a trim anomaly? A single extra minute on the runway might have spared 6 lives and prevented another tragedy in medical aviation. Jeju Air disaster. January had been tragic, but December had offered little reprieve. On December 29th, a Boeing 737 operated by Jeju Air crashed at Muon International Airport, South Korea's deadliest aviation disaster in decades. The flight had been smooth and uneventful until final approach. Air traffic control had issued a bird strike warning, as Muon was known for frequent encounters, 10 in just 5 years. The pilots adjusted their course slightly to avoid potential birds, but kept returning to the glide path. Airspeed and descent rate remained steady. 2 minutes later, the crew declared a mayday, reporting an actual bird strike. They initiated a go-around, retracting the landing gear and flaps, and requested to land in the opposite direction, indicating urgency. However, when they attempted the second approach, the flaps and landing gear failed to deploy. Whether due to damage or system failure remains unclear. Without flaps, the aircraft had to land at a much higher speed and touch down halfway down the runway. With minimal braking distance and 1 thrust reverser operational, it could not stop in time. The 737 overran the runway and slammed into a berm housing a concrete antenna structure. The crash killed all 135 passengers and 4 of 6 crew members. 2 surviving flight attendants seated in the tail section that broke off were rescued and hospitalized. Investigators found bird feathers and blood on both engines, later identified as belonging to Baikal teals, small ducks native to East Asia. What if the bird strike radar warning system, proposed but never implemented at Muon Airport, had been operational that morning? A single detection alert could have rerouted the aircraft's approach by just a few miles, sparing 79 lives and rewriting South Korea's aviation history. A man walks home after a long day at work. Above him, the distant roar of an aircraft grows louder, heavier, closer than usual. He slows down and looks up. A Boeing 747, clearly in serious danger, descends through the evening sky.